This is Nightly Business Report with Bill Griffith and Sue Herrera.
Talks break down. President Trump declares a shutdown meeting with congressional Democrats a total waste of time, bringing it to an abrupt end.
Shutdown stress. The partial government closure is starting to cast a chill over business, with warning signs coming from a number of different industries.
That's a wrap. U.S. and Chinese officials end 3 days of trade talks. And while there's optimism, differences still remain. Those stories and much more tonight on Nightly Business Report. It's Wednesday, January 9th.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome. A dramatic day at the White House. A meeting between President Trump and House Speaker Nancy Pelosi and Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer seemingly ended almost before it began. Negotiations to reopen parts of the government that are closed have stalled. The shutdown is now in its 19th day, one of the longest in history. And Fitch says if it drags on much longer, the U.S. risks losing its AAA credit rating. Elon Mui is in our nation's capital tonight.
It's a shutdown breakdown. President Trump calling a meeting with Democrats at the White House today a total waste of time. He tweeted that he asked if they would approve his border wall if he reopened the government. When House Speaker Nancy Pelosi said no, Trump tweeted that he said bye-bye. Later, outside the White House, Vice President Mike Pence said Trump won't back down.
I think the president made his position very clear today that there will be no deal without a wall.
Chuck Schumer, the top Democrat in the Senate, accused the president of literally walking out of their closed-door meeting in the Situation Room of the White House.
Again, we saw a temper tantrum because he couldn't get his way and he just walked out of the meeting.
The confrontation comes on a day when both sides sought to shore up their base. Democrats said that President Trump is manufacturing a crisis and said that he cares more about the border wall than federal workers. Meanwhile, Trump paid a visit to Capitol Hill today to sell his shutdown strategy to GOP lawmakers. There had been some grumbling amongst moderates who were eager to get government workers back on the job. The president is still weighing whether to call a national emergency in order to build the wall without congressional approval. Today, Trump said that Republicans have his back.
The Republican Party, I can say, and I just left an hour meeting. We had a great time, actually. There was no discussion about anything other than solidarity. We want national security and border security for our country.
Tomorrow, the president will head to the southern border to continue his public appeal, while the government shutdown enters day 20. For Nightly Business Report, I'm Elon Mui in Washington.
The shutdown is also threatening the IPO market. The partial closure of the Securities and Exchange Commission is forcing some companies that had wanted to go public to push back their plans, which means that there could be no IPOs this month, making this just the third time since 1995 that there were no new stock issues in the month of January. 2019 has been expected to be a strong year for initial public offerings.
And it's not just the IPO market. The partial shutdown is also starting to pressure business more broadly, rippling through to industries you might not expect, like brewers. Frank Holland is in Hackensack, New Jersey.
Seeing the glass half full after a strong 2018.
We're running a good business, and business is very good.
Elementary Brewing in Hackensack, New Jersey decided to make a $1 million investment to more than triple brewing capacity.
We never expected that this would be the hiccup.
But the government shutdown is stopping Blake Crawford and Michael Roosevelt from getting the licenses they need to expand and meet the growing demand for their signature Hackensack lager.
We're paying almost $1,000 a day to occupy that building between the lease and the property taxes and the utilities and the payments on the equipment. It is costing a lot of money every day. And every day that the government is shut down means one more day that I don't know when I am going to start getting revenue to offset those expenses.
Staff in the Alcohol and Tobacco Tax and Trade Bureau of the Treasury Department are among the 380,000 workers deemed non-essential during the shutdown. The office, known as TTB, issues licenses to makers of alcohol, including the 6,300 craft breweries in the U.S.
The term non-essential government staff is kind of interesting because it's only non-essential if your business doesn't depend entirely on that department being open.
TTB also approves new formulas and even new labels. The Brewers Association says it's a big deal because brewers make roughly a third of their income during summer months. TTB's closure also impacting wine and spirits makers. The spirits trade group saying distillers are in the midst of planning their seasonal offerings, which is completely impossible without the prompt label and formula approvals.
There's no reason why businesses like ours should be stopped from growing because of any government policy debate.
Before the government shutdown, the owners of Elementary expected to get their approvals this month. Now, instead of bottling their beer, they're worried about a bottleneck at the TTB.
With this shutdown, I have no idea how long it's going to take, even after the shutdown is over and the TTB workers are back reviewing applications, how long it's going to take them to work through their backlog.
For Nightly Business Report, I'm Frank Holland in Hackensack, New Jersey.
So where else are the ripple effects of the shutdown going to be felt? Joining us tonight, we welcome back Eric Gordon, professor at the University of Michigan's Ross School of Business. Happy New Year, Eric. Welcome back.
Happy New Year to you, Bill and Sue.
It seems every day we learn a new industry or business or enterprise is affected by this shutdown where you never would expect it. Frank Holland's story is a good example of that. It really points to the surprising relationship the government has with the private sector right now, right?
Yeah, it turns out that the government is involved in all sorts of things that we don't think they're involved in. And when they're shut down, it means industry after industry is in trouble.
Now, you gave us a list of some of the things that you see on the horizon, one of which is home sales could be hurt, partly because if you deal with the government for your mortgage, that's not going to be processed. But also, and this one kind of surprised me, that the drug review by the FDA.
Yeah, you can't just sell new drugs, thank goodness. They have to be approved by the FDA. That's a long, expensive kind of process. But here's something that's I think is interesting. A blockbuster drug, the drugs that make or break these big drug companies these days, they sell about $3 million worth a day. And that means if the delay is 30 days, just 30 days delay in FDA approval can cost you, $300 million. If it's down for 3 months, it could be $1 billion lost to drug companies. And even the biggest drug companies can't afford that.
Right. And even the workers, the government workers who are affected by this that are not receiving a paycheck, I mean, we're talking hundreds of thousands of people out there. They're not making home payments if they are living paycheck to paycheck. And they may not buy big ticket items like cars down the road as well, right?
Yeah, I think, if you're worried about when you're going to get a paycheck again, you're going to hold off on big ticket items that are discretionary items. If your car broke and you have to buy it, you have to buy it. But I'll tell you what, if I wasn't getting a paycheck, I wouldn't be buying anything big now. So I think a lot of industries, everything from big screen TVs to refrigerators to cars, are going to be hurting.
So does a business in the private sector need to rethink its relationship with the government, maybe change its business model or the way it does business or some of the products that it sells to the consumer as a result of this? Is there a learning curve in this particular situation?
So, I think there is. I think we've been alerted to a risk we haven't thought about very much. Even though there have been other government shutdowns, they've tended to be very short and not had a big effect. But, when you consider risk factors now, you probably have to list, gosh, we are dependent on government approvals, and if we don't get them, it can hurt our business.
Indeed. Eric Gordon with your University of Michigan Ross School of Business. Always good to see you. Thanks for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
And another example of the shutdown's reach, the Hubble Space Telescope is suffering some technical problems. NASA calls it a hardware issue, and there are reports that its repair could be delayed because some of the government employees needed to troubleshoot that problem are not working.
To Wall Street now, where the Dow's win streak was extended to 4 days today. Trade talks with China and the release of the minutes from the most recent Fed meeting helped give stocks a lift. But the gains were pared late this afternoon when news surfaced that shutdown meeting at the White House did not go well. The Dow closed with a gain of about 91 points today at 23,879. The NASDAQ was up 60. The S&P 500 added 10 points.
And those trade talks that Bill just mentioned concluded today in Beijing. And while there's some optimism that progress is being made, any deal is likely still a long way off. Eunice Yoon has our report tonight.
The U.S. delegation is on its way back to Washington, but that comes after an unexpected third day of talks. The discussions were supposed to wrap up on Tuesday, but were extended by a day, and the Foreign Ministry today said that shows both sides are serious about the talks. Now, as these negotiations were proceeding, there was another sign of flexibility on the part of the Chinese. Beijing granted approvals for 5 GMO crops, and that paves the way for companies such as Dow DuPont to sell its biotech seeds into China. However, as has often been the case with these discussions with China, people who follow these talks say the move was welcome but long overdue. American companies have been waiting for these approvals for years. And that gets to the core of these discussions. Are the Chinese really willing to go far enough to address American concerns and get a deal done? There are reports that there has been progress, but on the less contentious issues that are easier to resolve, such as greater Chinese purchases of U.S. farm and energy products to reduce the trade deficit. But it appears that there's still not much common ground on some of the tougher and structural problems, like forced technology transfers, intellectual property rights protection, and state subsidies for Chinese firms. There's an expectation now that the next step will be higher-level discussions between Trade Representative Bob Lighthizer and Vice Premier Liu He, possibly as early as next week in Washington. For Nightly Business Report, I'm Eunice Yoon in Beijing.
By the way, there have been reports that President Trump would talk about trade with high-level Chinese officials on the sidelines of the World Economic Forum in Davos later this month, but now that may not happen. Late today, the White House said the president is considering canceling his trip to Switzerland if the partial government shutdown still is not resolved.
And now to the Fed, which today released the minutes of its last meeting, where policymakers decided to hike interest rates. But as Steve Leisman reports, not everyone was on board.
Minutes to the December meeting, where the central bank controversially raised rates for the 4th time in a year, showed Fed officials were already thinking about bringing a halt to their hikes. In fact, minutes show some members even opposed the rate increase at the time. In the end, the Fed decided to hike based on strong economic and jobs data. Despite the sell-off in the market and rise in volatility, the minutes show officials still expected growth to remain above trend this year and that more hikes could be coming. But Fed officials tried to tweak the language of their statement then to indicate that future hikes were much more dependent on economic data than they had been. It didn't work at the time. In the wake of the meeting, the Dow Jones plunged 2,300 points, or nearly 10% over the ensuing weeks, before clawing back most of the post-Fed meeting loss. But it took soothing comments from Fed Chairman Jerome Powell just this past week, suggesting the Fed is more flexible on rates than markets thought. Several Fed speakers on Wednesday emphasized this new patience. They said they're likely to hike, but we'll wait to see whether the pessimism in the market or the optimism in the data wins out this year. For Nightly Business Report, I'm Steve Leisman.
Time to take a look at some of today's upgrades and downgrades. There are a lot of them. The Bank of America was upgraded to buy from neutral at UBS. The analyst there cited attractive valuation and healthy operating leverage. The call comes 1 week before the bank reports its earnings. Target price, $32. That stock rose about 1% today to $25.76. Morgan Stanley was upgraded to buy from neutral at Citi. The analyst says that the increase in market volatility can lead to higher trading revenue throughout the year. Price target now $48, and shares rose a fraction to $41.74.
Nike was downgraded to neutral from outperform at Baird. The analyst cites concerns that the stock's valuation might not be sustainable. The price target is $82. The shares were slightly lower to $76.59. Oracle was downgraded to equal weight from overweight at Barclays. The analyst cites competition in Oracle's database business, and also in its cloud offerings. The price target is $55. The stock was off just a fraction to $47.78. Barclays also cutting its rating on Lowe's to equal weight from overweight. The analyst cites macro uncertainty and industry trends. The price target is $105. The stock was down slightly to $97.03.
Still ahead, we'll take you to a border town where a lot of business is getting done. Don't look now, but oil prices have been in the midst of a sharp about face. Prices rose once again today after Saudi Arabia reassured the market that its oil production and exports will continue to decline. Optimism about the U.S.-China trade talks have also been helping to lift that market. Oil settled above $52 today, and just since the low achieved on December 24th, prices have risen nearly 15%.
Earnings season gets underway in earnest next week. A few reports have already trickled in, but one thing is clear. Guidance for 2019 will be the big focus for investors. Bob Pisani is at the New York Stock Exchange.
Earnings season officially kicks off next week. Good news is a lot of bad news has been priced into the market. We saw that yesterday when Samsung dropped 1.5% after terrible earnings guidance. We saw it again today. Lennar missed earnings and revenue estimates, deferred its guidance for the full year. Stock's up. You might expect it to be down, but it was up almost 10%. It's not clear how much negative news the markets can handle before again turning down. For the bears, a lot of the damage to the global economy has already been done. Morgan Stanley's Mike Wilson says he still sees an earnings recession ahead this year. That would mean 2 straight quarters of negative year-over-year earnings growth. Early fourth quarter earnings are mostly beating. No surprise there. It's full year guidance that matters, though. Of the 20 companies that have reported, 90% have beaten expectations, but about 70% have had their first quarter estimates cut by analysts after they reported. Where are they coming from? Well, there's negative comments from Apple and Samsung and Micron. They've cut the profit growth forecast for technology sector in half, 5% to 2.5%. Oil prices dropped like a stone in the fourth quarter. No surprise, estimates for oil companies' profit growth were also slashed dramatically. So it's clear earnings are slowing down, but how much? Some believe earnings growth could be flattish in 2019. Others think earnings will grow in the mid-single digits. Wharton School professor Jeremy Siegel says even if there's no earnings growth, the market valuations still aren't crazy. Well, that's comforting. For Nightly Business Report, I'm Bob Pisani at the New York Stock Exchange.
A buzzkill for Constellation Brands. And that's where we begin tonight's Market Focus. The maker of Corona Beer lowered its profit outlook today after reporting a sharp decline in earnings. Company also said wine and spirit sales were soft, and it expects that weakness to continue. Constellation also cited higher expenses related to its $4 billion investment in cannabis company Canopy Growth. Shares plunged 12% today to $150.94. Skyworks Solutions lowered its quarterly sales and profit targets. The chip maker cited weakness among its biggest smartphone customers. Investors have been focused on the outlooks that have been issued by smartphone suppliers after Samsung estimated a sharp decline in profit and Apple lowered its quarterly sales forecast. So shares of Skyworks rose nearly 4% today to $67.69. Chesapeake Energy plans to lower its capital expenditures this year. The shale oil driller will also reduce its rig count by 20% to an average of about 14 rigs. But the company said fourth quarter output will likely top forecasts. And that sent the small cap stock higher today by more than 12.5%. It closed at $2.76.
T-Mobile said it added about 1 million net new phone subscribers in the fourth quarter, easily exceeding estimates, which were about 850,000. The company cites competitive wireless plans and trade-in offers. This follows Verizon's strong quarterly subscriber numbers that we told you about yesterday. The shares were down a tick to $67.72. After the bell, Bed Bath & Beyond beat earnings expectations by a penny, but revenue came up short. The retailer said it's ahead of schedule when it comes to stemming declines in its operating profit. It also expects fiscal 2019 earnings to be similar to 2018. And analysts were expecting worse. So, as you might expect, the stock initially rose in the after hours. It also ended the regular day up 4% to $12.26. Also out after the bell, KB Home topped profit estimates, even as total revenue fell in the quarter. The home builder also gave a rosy outlook for the year, saying it expects to build more homes this year than initially planned. Investors liked what they heard. They sent the shares initially higher in the after hours. Shares also finished the regular day up 4% to $21.98.
Well, certainly the southern border is the talk of Washington and Wall Street and Main Street these days. And at the busiest checkpoint between the U.S. and Mexico, small business owners are keeping a close eye on the decisions coming out of our nation's capital. Aditi Roy is in San Ysidro, California for us tonight.
It's a bustling weekday in San Ysidro, California, a stone's throw away from the Mexican border. Despite the government shutdown, Customs and Border Protection officials are still manning the San Ysidro checkpoint, and people are crossing over as usual. It's the busiest crossing in the Western Hemisphere, with 90,000 cars and pedestrians coming into the U.S. every day through the checkpoint. These shop owners rely heavily on those Mexican residents crossing over to the U.S. to buy clothes, shoes, or perfume, contributing to the nearly $700 million in sales generated in San Ysidro every year.
We really depend on cross-border consumers. Our retail industry, our tourism industry depends on this cross-border consumer.
Business leaders say since President Trump started talking about building a wall, delays at the crossing have increased. And now, with the president forcefully calling on Congress to approve the nearly $6 billion needed to help pay for the barrier, business leaders are worried it will affect the local economy.
Business doesn't like uncertainty, and the border closures recently have created uncertainty. Uncertainty translates into discouraging trade and travel. And when you discourage trade and travel, you see a direct economic impact.
One report says a delay of 45 minutes per crossing cost San Diego County nearly $1.3 billion in lost business income per year. Last fall, the San Ysidro crossing was shut down for more than 5 hours after a dispute between Border Patrol and migrants, costing a whole day's worth of commerce for many local merchants and consumers. They include Lu Wang, who owns her own clothing and shoe stores in Tijuana. She buys her merchandise in the U.S., and the closure last fall was a big setback.
Your business has gone down?
Yeah, too much.
Why?
Because the security.
Fewer than 10 miles away, Customs and Border Protection officials have erected 8 border wall prototypes. As the president and Congress grapple over whether these models will turn into reality, this border town watches and waits.
The president is scheduled to visit the border tomorrow. For Nightly Business Report, I'm Aditi Roy, San Ysidro, California.
Coming up, splitting up. It is not often the world's richest man files for divorce.
Here's what we're watching for tomorrow. As Aditi just mentioned, the president will be visiting the southern border, and disputes over funding for construction of a wall will be discussed. Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell will participate in a question and answer session at the Economic Club of Washington. And overnight, we're going to get new economic data out of China, specifically on inflation. That's what we're watching for on Thursday.
Toyota is recalling more than 1 million vehicles in the U.S. to replace a potentially deadly Takata airbag. The automaker said the airbag inflator could explode with too much force and eject shrapnel. That recall applies to multiple Toyota, Scion, and Lexus models from 2010 through 2017.
A drop in mortgage rates encouraged more potential homebuyers to apply for a mortgage in the first week of the new year. The Mortgage Bankers Association said total application volume rose 23.5% last week compared to the week before, although volume is now down about 9% compared to the same time last year. But as we've been reporting, the partial government shutdown could prevent some of those mortgage applications from actually closing.
Well, if you're in the market for a skyscraper, Manhattan's Chrysler Building is reportedly up for sale. The Wall Street Journal says the owners, an Abu Dhabi government fund and a New York developer, are working with a commercial real estate firm to try to attract a buyer. The Abu Dhabi group paid $800 million for its 90% stake back in 2008, and that's an amount some real estate investors say might be difficult to fetch.
Maybe not for this next guy. Amazon CEO and founder Jeff Bezos and his wife Mackenzie are getting a divorce. Maybe you've heard about that. And when a divorce involves the world's richest man and the most valuable public company, it could go down as one of the most expensive splits in history. Here's Robert Frank.
Jeff Bezos announced on Twitter today that he and his wife of 25 years, Mackenzie, were getting a divorce. He said they had been separated and decided to continue our shared lives as friends. The question is what this could mean for Amazon, the most valuable company in the world. Now, they would most likely file in Seattle, where they live. Washington is a community property state, which means that all property and debt acquired during a marriage has to be divided equitably, which usually means half. Now, Bezos founded Amazon in 1994, a year after they were married, so his 16% stake is currently valued at around $130 billion. She could legally be entitled to half of that, or around $65 billion. But Bezos suggests this was amicable and won't result in a public court fight. He tweeted, quote, "We see wonderful futures ahead as parents, friends, and partners." Now, Seattle divorce attorneys tell me the Bezoses probably already have a settlement that's been done in private, and there is no requirement to make the settlement public. For Nightly Business Report, I'm Robert Frank.
Before we go, here's a look at the final numbers on Wall Street today. The Dow rose 91 points to 23,879. The Nasdaq added 60, and the S&P 500 was up 10. That will do it for us tonight on Nightly Business Report. I'm Sue Herrera. Thanks for joining us.
I'm Bill Griffith. Have a great evening, everybody. We'll see you tomorrow.